So I'm going to bring on Marisa Briny, my amazing friend. She is a TV host and lifestyle expert. She is an amazing mom who has also built supported communities like the New Jersey Moms. Thank you, Marisa, for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to you. I know some of your panel members are already in there, and you might be missing one, but she should be joining us shortly as well. So I'll hand it over to you and let you introduce yourself and bring on your panel members.
Thank you so much, Blessing. I'm so excited to be a part of this, and I just want to say this has been an incredible event and day so far, with just so much inspiration and validation, I think, for moms who are going through this shared experience together. And that's really why I was so excited to get involved, because I think we're all looking for that right now. So thank you for the introduction. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marisa Briny. As Blessing said, I'm a TV host. I'm a lifestyle expert on air. I work in various capacities, including on QVC, as well as on other networks as a lifestyle contributor. And then I also work with NJ Mom, which is a website here in New Jersey that supports New Jersey mothers. It's a resource for this community here in New Jersey. So if you're in Jersey or not, just we would love for you to be a part of what we do with NJ Mom. I host our videos and things like that. As well. So thank you so much to Mother Honestly and Sitter City for this great day. And I'm so excited to be a part of this. As I mentioned, I want to briefly just introduce this incredible panel and these amazing women who we have speaking today. So I'm just going to give them each a short introduction. And as Blessing said, the topic of this panel is going to be how to not do it all and how to more effectively share the load for our own mental health in 2021. And so first we have Sarah Peck, who is the founder of Startup Parent. She is an author, a startup advisor, and a yoga teacher based in New York City. Hey, Sarah, glad to have you with us. Hey, we also have Leslie Ford joining us on this panel. She has used research to inform growth and innovation strategy for more than 20 years now, and she is the founder of Mom's Hierarchy of Needs. And so we welcome Leslie. So excited to have you with us, Leslie, as well. And I know we're still waiting on Eve Rodsky, so I'll give a more appropriate introduction when she comes on in, but she is the author of Fair Play, and she's working to change society one marriage at a time by coming up with a new 21st century solution to an old problem. Oh, here's Eve. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
So she, as I said, you're trying to figure out a more effective solution for women shouldering really the burden or the majority of the burden of child rearing and domestic life at home, whether or not they work. So work outside the home, I should say. It's all work, as we know. So thank you, ladies, so much for being here. I would love to just start by asking each of you, how are you doing? Like, how are you doing at this stage of the game? We're in a new year, although it really doesn't feel like it. And so, Sarah, we'll start with you, and then we'll go on down. Just give us sort of a landscape and a barometer reading of how things are in your home and life.
Yeah, I mean, we finally got childcare back on January 11th, but I am still exhausted, and I had an amazingly good cry yesterday. The kind where you show up red-faced to daycare pickup and you see another parent, and those dads, he was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No, I'm crying." He was like, "I get it." So I just really compassion for the parents out there where you can cry with each other and be like, "This is hard." Yeah,
it is. It absolutely is. And I think we've all had those moments. I have them almost weekly where you just have to let it out. So I'm glad you had that yesterday. And it probably re-energized you a little bit coming into today, which is kind of nice also. Leslie, how about you? How are things going, Mom?
Overall, good. I'm excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. I will say that although I didn't have a good cry, and there have been days since this all started, but this week I found like I had eroded some work-life boundaries. I have an exciting project that I've been working on for a client, but I've been pulling really long hours, which has meant I'm starting dinner late, which means the kids are going to bed late, which means I'm going to bed late, which means everything's a mess in the mornings. And it kind of occurred to me this morning that, wow, I need to do another reset. And reassess some personal boundaries. But overall, we're all like super healthy. So I'm grateful for that.
And that's really been just such a common theme for so many of us that, coming back to that time and time again throughout this all. Eve, how are things looking in your house?
Well, I feel really, thank God for fair play. I will say, I don't think my marriage would have survived if we had to do this right now. If I was the only parent that was in charge of the ownership mindset of what I call the fair play cards, I probably wouldn't still be married now, part of this pandemic. So I will say that, but I will say that I think I'm also feeling really good and hopeful because, we haven't gotten yet to the solutions, but we are getting to consciousness. I don't think that, those of us who do this work, who value care and think about this, we're screaming to each other in a silo that we can no longer build society on the unpaid labor and the undervalued labor of women and women of color. And so I feel like when you see the New York Times have a huge series on this, and mainstream outlets are starting to care for care, I'm in a really hopeful mood today.
That's great. That's wonderful to hear. And I think coming off of all of the panels prior to us, I sort of feel the same in the sense that it's energizing to hear so many people valuing this conversation and putting this conversation first, as it should have been, many moons ago. But I completely agree with that sentiment. There is so much to talk about here on this topic. And, we're going to dive into a lot, but I want to start first with Leslie. And this kind of goes off of what you were just saying about that sort of self-assessment on those boundaries. We've heard that number over and over again today, and so much. 5.4 million women have left the workforce. It's a staggering number. It turns your stomach when you hear it. And right now, so many women are afraid for their jobs. Unemployment and things like that are a huge concern, but also, they're struggling. And so how do we really navigate those boundaries, and what do we need to do in order to be able to say no at work in a way that doesn't jeopardize our career or limit our professional growth? It's a place that many women feel stuck right now. What would your advice be for that?
Oh, it's such a great question. And it's top of mind. And I'm seeing this in my research, and I'm also seeing this in my work with employers. There's kind of a couple things happening. On the one hand, right, everyone wants to be excellent at everything. So we put a huge amount of pressure on ourselves to deliver the work in the same way, even though we don't have the same resources or the same available time or the same support that we once had for our children and for our homes and for our lives. And you also have the employer side of things, right? Organizations are changing, almost weekly based on the pandemic. They're scrambling to stay profitable and stay relevant during a recession. So it's, I think, conspiring to make this conversation harder. And it was already hard before. But what I encourage people to do, and that's if the psychological safety is there, and it's not there in all workplaces for all women, is start by, when something comes over and that request comes in, just start by asking, well, when do you need this back? When's it due? We're conditioned to treat everything with the same urgency, and not everything is urgent. And if you start to, apply that rigor to every request that comes in, it can produce a better result. A lot of people don't need things as quickly as you think they do. The other thing that I would recommend that I've used in my own life, and I've seen other colleagues use over the years and in brilliant ways, it's the, oh, wow, this is so exciting. Can't wait to work on this. But the last time we checked in, you told me that project X was more important. And this is now project Y. I love the idea of working on project Y, but it just means project X is going to slip maybe by a month or so. Is that okay? Or do we really want to kind of, make this trade-off? So again, just like all the things we sacrifice at home that are invisible, make the sacrifices and the trade-offs at work visible so that you and your manager or your colleagues can have a thoughtful conversation about what's really important. And I guess the third one, and I've had a colleague who did this really well, is to suggest a resource plan. So you say, oh, this new thing, so excited about it. Awesome. Can't wait to take it on. Let me come up with a little project plan for that and let you know what resources I'm going to need to execute on this. Because we don't really want to give something this important short shrift, do we? Right? So it's like you're acting like a leader. You're explaining that something important is coming in and you need the resources to support it. And that means people, that might mean money, whatever is required. If you don't have the psychological safety to have any of those conversations, then I would recommend leaning heavily on your parent resource group or other parents in your organization and getting some collective energy around pushing back on unreasonable expectations. Because again, a lot of mothers right now are suffering with that fear of losing their jobs. And in many cases, it's a very real fear.
I think that's great advice. And you know what? It just dawned on me. I did not ask. I got a little thrown off as I was doing the intros because I was waiting for Eve to pop up. So I apologize for this, but I want to just make sure that people know a little bit about each of your organizations and what you do. So Leslie, can you just tell people a little bit about Mom's Hierarchy of Needs and what that all means?
Sure. So I came up with the Mom's Hierarchy of Needs, which looks a lot like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a triangle with all the foundational categories at the bottom and the aspirational categories at the top after I burned out at work when my second child was born. So this was a little over 5 years ago. I thought I was going to die. I didn't understand how other mothers or even parents were doing it. And I became incredibly curious and did a ton of research into why it's so hard to make space for self-care and growth. So now I research and write about this and share it for mothers from my website, Mom's Hierarchy of Needs. And more recently, I've started looking at all of the systems that make it hard. So there's the internal reasons and why we don't give ourselves permission to make space for growth and self-care. But there's a lot of external reasons too. So I am working within those systems with employers and with organizations to change the way they value, support, and retain caregivers in the workplace.
Amazing.
On the employer side.
And now we see why that answer was so eloquent to that question, because this is something you've really studied. And I think that the way that you put that really is sort of instilling tools of confidence in women to be able to speak those things and do it in a way where they feel like they're speaking up for themselves, but also, as you said, seen as a leader and seen as someone who is also looking out for the benefit of their employer or their company. So I love that. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Eve next. And Eve, first, just tell us a little bit about Fair Play. I gave the sort of synopsis, but tell us a little bit more about your book and why you felt compelled to really create this new way for the 21st century.
Well, I love Leslie's work. We are very aligned. And like Leslie, I think that second child just put me over the edge. I collapsed in my car over a text my husband sent me that said, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries." And I thought, my marriage is going to end over being the fulfiller of my husband's smoothie needs. But I think what's bigger is, I've committed my life to, and that's why Leslie and I have such synergies, to the home. So yesterday, my good friend Bridget Schulte in New America, they had a big study that showed the difference in lived experience at the home between men who do more in the home. And I'm centering hetero cisgender relationships right here because that's the heteronormative places where a lot of our problems are. But of course, I recognize the changing family and how important it is to talk to broader audiences about this. But I am talking hetero cisgender right now, that we men don't do care. We are still responsible for 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family. Those women who may have psychological safety or not, what I've realized is that we lose our voice in the home, and that affects how we use our voice in the workplace. Because oftentimes we were asking for flexibility or for something that maybe we wouldn't even need if we actually had a real partner in the home. It never even occurred to me to start my workday at the normal time. I opted out, and I use the word in quotes. I was forced out of the corporate workplace for exactly what Leslie said. When I had the psychological safety to ask my manager to work from home on Fridays, she said to me, I cannot do that for you because that's my plan. And I don't want to expose the fact that I do that. Right. So you think about now, I'm not mad at her anymore. I just feel sad that she didn't have the psychological safety to feel like she could ask on my behalf because she was hiding her own childcare arrangements. But more importantly to me, as a recent colleague just wrote, my glass ceiling was my husband, right? Because it never even occurred to me not to ask for flexibility because I thought I could ask him to actually own more in the home. And so what I say is that why our work complements each other is because I look at the last frontier of feminism to me is in the place closest to us, which is our homes. And often that's where we lose our voice and we have guilt and shame. And we'll talk about that. But the other thing that keeps me up at night, because you're asking me how I was doing, Marissa, is the fact that I think it's really important to recognize that the thing that keeps me up at night, the statistic that keeps me up at night is that 70% of the 1% of men, so the men who are who are still the heads of our Fortune 500 companies, the men who are in Congress and in positions of power, 70% of those men have the most traditional family structure imaginable. They have stay-at-home wives. And so those are people setting our lived experience. And it looks nothing like the lived experience, especially for women of color. If you are a Black woman, you are 85% of Black women in this country are co-breadwinners or primary breadwinners. That led to nothing like the people setting our policies. So that's why I really look at home, because I think that if those men were doing care, like the New America policy report came out yesterday, if they were living that lived experience of how hard it is to do care, like when my husband took over extracurricular sports and said, shit, you're on a 75-person text chain over practice. This is taking up my whole day. I have 100 text messages when I look at my phone. I said, exactly. That's what it's like to coordinate extracurricular sports. And you also need to go find their birth certificates now. Thank you. I never have to think about this again. So it's this idea of lived experience. And how do we start matching our lived experience at home with the actual policies we want to have in the workplace? So that's the stuff that keeps me up at night.
That's a staggering statistic, and I've actually never heard that until you just said it. And that like stops you in your tracks because it really puts things in perspective in an alarming way, I think. And you know what you said about the text chain, it's like, welcome to the mental load. And this is what so many moms, I think, right now, it's like on overdrive. I mean, it's that combined with all of the minute decisions surrounding safety. And am I comfortable doing this? Is that person's family comfortable doing this? Should I ask them to do that? Are they going to think I'm too lax? Are they going to think I'm too strict about, everything surrounding COVID? It's all of these sort of compounding, forces that are weighing on us and our mental health. So thank you, Eve. That was amazing. And with that said, Sarah, I'm going to get to you in a second, I promise. But on that note, I have to ask Eve this. So in my family, just a little personal, peek into our world. I have 3 kids under 5. My oldest is about to turn 5. I have a 3.5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. My husband and I are both in TV. He works overnight. So our schedules are complete opposite, and they have been for many years. How would you suggest families with non-traditional schedules? Okay, so one partner is on shift work. Maybe they're a healthcare worker. Maybe they're in some other, industry that requires those non-traditional hours. Or maybe they're still traveling a lot. There are some professions who are still, required to be working in different cities or whatever it is. When 2 partners don't have aligning schedules, and when there's only one parent present primarily at a time, or maybe it's a few hour overlap, how do we better share the load? What are some strategies we can use when those external forces and scheduling forces are at play? Because I struggle with this a lot.
Absolutely. But I think it actually comes down to what Leslie said earlier. There is a secret formula, and that is what I call boundaries, systems, and communication. Because my research started by asking one question. It was either I'm going to eat, pray, love this crap out of my marriage and figure out, I don't care, whatever your overlapping schedule is, Marissa, right? If we're not living in the same household, if we're divorced, you're going to still have to figure out how to feed your kids and get them to school, right? We have, so somehow people figure it out, right? When they're not in the same household. So I started to think about, well, what would it look like if we treated our homes as our most important organization with some respect and rigor, where we're not actually figuring out who's taking the dog out to take a piss when it's taking a piss on your rug, when you're not actually setting the table and fighting about it when you're already hangry and cranky. So the danger, I will say, is that the home presents small. It could look like you are fighting about off-season blueberries or whose schedule is more important. But actually what happens is that's the danger of the home. Because what we're really talking about here is the bigger issues around accountability and trust. And we can talk after you speak with Sarah about what the systems are that I found the research showed about the systems failures, right? This is not crapping on men. This is saying that we have some real systems failures by not treating our home as our most important organization. But the one thing I will say is that even before you can get to whose schedule is more important or how do you do something, the what, we have to understand the why. And the why of the historical issues of why this has happened. One, I want to just say is a lot of white feminists, a lot of people have gotten into power by relying on the outsourcing to women of color. So let's just center that and say that that is an important part of the conversation. We cannot anymore just say to outsource. We have to really talk about who we're talking about when we say outsourcing, right? But more than that, the boundary around women's time, the core finding of fair play that affects our mental health is that we treat women's time as infinite, like it's sand, and we guard men's time in the society like it's diamonds. It is finite. And women, we do it in the workplace. We have pay equity. We see our dollar is not the same as a man's dollar. If women enter male profession, the salaries automatically go down. But it was women in the home. If you've ever heard to yourself, if you're so overwhelmed, just get help. That's what I call a toxic time message. That's devaluing the cognitive labor. If you've ever said to yourself, I'm a better multitasker, that is fundamentally not true. If you've ever said to yourself, in the time it takes me to tell him, her, they what to do, I should do it myself, fundamentally not true. If you've ever said to yourself, I do more because I have more flexibility or because I make less, that is fundamentally not true. Those are all toxic time messages that make our time not valuable to ourselves. So that's why the boundaries is actually the key. We can talk about systems and communication to get to that scheduling, but if you don't believe your time is diamonds, there's no system I can give you that's going to change your life. It is reclaiming the fact that I deserve as much time choice over my day as my husband gets, even though he makes more money than me. And so that means him taking up more of the invisible work, right, of all of what we categorize in fair play, that I can't hold this alone, because that is going to affect my mental health, my career, and the most important piece, my identity as becoming the fulfiller of his smoothie needs, as opposed to the vibrant person I want to be. So I think that the time is diamonds part is the boundary. Don't tell me to take a walk around the block. Give me time choice. That's a boundary.
That's like life-changing. I mean, that right there, I think, is just such a perspective shift from what all of us are used to hearing and have grown up hearing, and it is sort of ingrained in us. So that's amazing, and just so much to think about there. Thank you, Eve. Sarah, first, I do want to give you also an opportunity to just tell everybody a little bit about Startup Parent and about the work you do.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I run a company for women who are navigating parenting and entrepreneurship at the same time. It is an incredibly challenging thing to do. not even in a pandemic. So we have a podcast, we interview women entrepreneurs, and we have a leadership incubator called the Wise Women's Council for women and people who identify as women to come spend a year together and grow, to use this as growth. So I want to just first also jump off of Eve's back and say that I think all of the mothers and primary caretakers and parents out there who are doing caretaking, you deserve an honorary MBA for getting through this year. 4.6 million people lost their jobs so far. Women lost their jobs in this pandemic since the pandemic started. And so many women are going to struggle to return to work because of the anti-mom bias and the puzzles we place on people. And I think that you are doing the work of an MBA. Your time management skills, your ability to lead, to keep people alive, to feed people, to manage a household, to run all the work that you do. You put on your resume, you got an MBA this year because you did. So that's my message.
I love that. And it's so true. I mean, all of the organizational systems we've had to put in place on the fly are business principles really at their core. So I love that idea. Sign me up for that. I could use that on my resume. So that would be great to just add. Yep. So Sarah, because many moms and parents have had this sort of drop everything and change it as we go childcare situation due to we're hybrid this week, then the protocol's changing, then we had an exposure, it's just so much on the fly. What do you find out that works or doesn't work when kids are going back and forth to school and parents have had to adjust the swings of who's caring for them and who's doing the virtual schooling and all of these pieces that we've had to figure out as
Yeah, it's so challenging. And the first thing I want to say is that the psychological exhaustion and burden of having things change all the time is tremendous, right? If you feel exhausted because the decisions are changing every day at the last minute, it's real. For me, what I found to be really helpful in the conversations with working parents is to reset and lower or reset your expectations tremendously. We are not doing things the way we were 2 years ago or even last month. And so constantly just reminding people, colleagues, friends, parents, that we're in a new reality. We can't expect to do the things we used to do the way we used to do them. And a very concrete example in my own family is I used to change my children's clothes every 12 hours. I don't do that anymore. I change them like every 2 days because I don't want to do lots of laundry and it's not interesting to me. I have no intellectual interest in laundry. So if it's not very, very dirty, they're not changing. Things like that, changing our expectations. The way to do it is, number one, recognize that it's happening. Number two, say it out loud, state the obvious, right? To your colleagues, to your friends, to your co-parent if you have one. We're not living in the time we were before. We can't do the things the way we used to do them. We shouldn't expect that of ourselves. Number two, have agreements, come up with new agreements. And then number three, I would say cut your work in half if you can. Practical tools for how to do this. If you work at a company and you write a newsletter weekly, make it bi-weekly, every other week. If you do a weekly podcast, do it bi-monthly, bi-weekly. If you have 12 projects on your plate, go to your boss and say, hey, we have 12 projects. Let's talk about which is first and what 6 we can do. When you talk to your partner, if you have a partner or somebody else that you're working with in the home, say, we used to do all these fancy meals. I'm going to make one batch of mac and cheese on Sunday night, and they are going to eat wheat and cheese for 7 days in a row because I cannot make more meals, right? My kids will be fine on string cheese and apples. That was probably a fancy meal 200 years ago, right? So we can lower our expectations in order to stay sane psychologically, to move up Leslie's hierarchy of our needs, to finally tap into the place where it's like, hey, I'm going to take a bath by myself for 2 minutes, right? So I would say, lower your expectations. You only have to do a good enough job. You're not damaging your children if you leave them in clothes for 2 days in a row and they ate string cheese, for most children. Maybe some children need different needs, right? And keep speaking up and keep telling people that we cannot expect the same things that we did 2 years ago in a time that is not the same as it was 2 years ago.
I love that. A good friend of mine, and she might be watching, Andrea, she's a mutual friend of Blessing and mine. She always has this saying, done is better than perfect. And especially over the past year, she and I have had mom talks about that, where it's like, we can't operate on this level of everything is the norm. And it's, especially as this drags on, for a year now, it sort of starts to get to the point where we forget that we're living through this, life-changing, tumultuous time. So I love that. And Sarah said, and not doing it might even be better. Yeah, absolutely. We can put some things aside. Okay, so a question for each of you. What are some daily routines that have really helped you stay grounded and prioritize your own mental health that may be helpful for all of our mamas watching this? Can you share some of those with us? I think, Leslie, we'll start with you.
Sure, I'm happy to. And echoing what both Sarah and Eve have shared, we can't do things the same way. And we also have to give ourselves different levels of permission. I think what Eve described so beautifully was just that a lot of us haven't been trained or taught to value our own time. And once you make that mental shift, then everything is different. I've seen in my pandemic study, which I've been running since March, which now has over 1,500 parents in it, of which 95% are mothers, so overwhelmingly mothers, that of what's hardest right now, and when they're asked the question, what has been the hardest for you? Now it's almost a third who say not having enough time alone or any time alone. So my favorite self-care ritual that I've held on tightly to during this time has been to get outside for my run every day. And yes, I live in Boston, and yes, we had a snowstorm earlier this week, but was I out there running in it? You bet, because it is alone. Nobody is asking me for anything. There's no mommy this, or can I get, it's just, I need that mental space, and I need to reset myself every morning. So, and running is very socially distant, right? So it's been a shift since the pandemic to always run outdoors instead of running at the gym. And it's been huge. I mean, it's my sanity space every day. Does it happen beautifully and perfectly every day? Most of the time, 95% of the time. The times that it doesn't, I've thrown my youngest in the running stroller, 100%. Yep, I've run after my kids when they're on their scooters, or I've run little tiny circles around them in the playground while they play. I've done all those things. So, give yourself some grace if things don't work out the way you want, but giving yourself a little time alone every day is huge, no matter what it is that you're doing in that time alone.
So important. Eve, what about you? Some routines that have helped you this past year?
Well, two I'll talk about. One is from my friend Cheryl Gonzalez Ziegler. She wrote a book called Mommy Burnout, and I did this early on years ago when we talked about it, but she's talked about this a lot recently during the pandemic. Anytime guilt and shame are just I burned them before my book tour. I actually wrote them down on a piece of paper and I burned it in a ritual. And that was very helpful because I was handing over all the cards, the metaphor, to my husband. And so the other thing that I would say in terms of the ritual around guilt and shame is to change anytime you feel guilty about something. And this has so helped me, this cognitive reframe, because Fair Play is all about cognitive reframes. Anytime you feel guilty about something, instead of saying, I feel guilty because, you say, I made this decision because. And then as Sarah said, you say it out loud. I made the decision not to put you to bed tonight because actually I have a mom's group that I'm going to help, and I feel really good about that. That's part of my identity, right? So anytime you say, I feel guilty because I couldn't get to that project, you vocalize it to your manager. I made the decision not to prioritize this because I'm focusing on project Y. So anytime that you start feeling guilt and shame, just reframe it to say, I made this decision because. And then as Sarah said, say it out loud. And then finally, Leslie and I are both research nerds, if I don't mind calling you that too.
Absolutely.
So now I have thousands of data points where I ask people, what's their most important practice? Not one of those people in now thousands and thousands of interviews has said to me communication. I always hear other types of self-care practices, never communication. I'm here to tell you communication is your most important practice. It is your lifeline to the rest of the world to articulate what you need, and especially to your partner. And so many women especially said to me, I don't communicate about domestic life. But then they'll tell me that they dump wet clothes in their partner's pillow if they forget to pull them out of the dryer. A woman said she didn't communicate about domestic life. I found out she's on an Instagram group. She created an Instagram account called The Shit My Husband Doesn't Pick Up. So I'm here to tell you, you're already communicating about domestic life. You're already communicating about how you feel at work. So instead, do it in a time when emotion is low, cognition is high. And that's why you need consistency, a practice, a check-in. And that's been the thing that saved Seth and me. We prioritize our 10-minute a night check-in like we've been prioritizing hand sanitizer. It is the most important thing that we've had during the pandemic.
I love that. I love that so much. Sarah, what about you? Some things that have helped you this year?
Eve, just 1,000% yes, by the way. Like just saying things out loud. We there's so many thoughts we have in our head, and you just have to vocalize it like a 2-year-old sometimes. You're like, there are clothes on the floor. I do not like clothes on the floor. I do not like clothes on the floor at all. I would like someone to pick them up. I would like that person to not be me, right? Like just like over and over again, even to my husband, like my underwear are all dirty and I am on my period. They need to be cleaned by tonight at 8 p.m. Otherwise, I bleed everywhere, right? Like these are the kinds of things that I think are so important to say. And I know not everyone listening is a menstruating person, but for me, to answer to your question, Marissa, is rage singing in the car. I go out to the car, I go in there, I turn music up really loud, and I sing as loud as I can. It's not screaming, it's singing, because I've got to get it out and I've got to share, because there's anger and frustration and stress and tension, and it allows me to come back into the house and say things clearly and use my words. My partner and I have an agreement that we will both take the kids out of the house away from the other person, because it's just so hard to be in the presence of other people always 24/7. To people without children, I say it's like trying to hold a 3-pound weight over your head. It feels fine for the first 10 minutes and then even an hour, but 24 hours in, you are burning, right? It's really hard. So every day we switch who's taking the children away from the other person, just to regain mental sanity and clarity.
I love that. And I will add for myself, being involved in things like this has been a form of self-care for me, because these things feel they're very important to me. And what I do with NJ Mom, things where we're supporting each other as mothers, that has taken on a whole new meaning in my life this past year. It was always important to me, but I'll just add that. We are towards the end of our time here. I think we have a couple more minutes. I was given a 10-minute warning, so maybe just one last question if we can. But Eve, this is for you. Boundaries, we've heard a lot about that the last few years. We think of these in a professional setting. How have you found, you've spoken a little bit about this, but how can we make sure that we're instilling these boundaries as parents so that we combat that burnout? We only have a couple minutes, but I do want to get to this because I think it's so important.
Systems. You have to have systems. I mean, you got to customize your defaults. You got to have respect and rigor for your home. And what that means is, as we said, it means recognizing you deserve as much time choice as your partner. It means having consistency in how you communicate about these issues. But at the end of the day, it requires that somebody else other than you is handling some of the cognitive labor. And that requires an ownership mindset, the same way we have at work. If I work for you, Leslie, I know if I walked into your office and said, hey, what should I be doing today? I'm just going to wait here until you tell me what to do. I know you would fire me, or you wouldn't hire me. I know you. I mean, we know each other now.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. But that's how we do it in our home, right? We have often there's a primary parent who has all the cognitive labor and someone else is just waiting there to be told what to do. That does not. So men said to me, in these cisgender relationships, they do not have psychological safety. They do not know their role. That's the number one thing men told me they hated about home life. The number one thing women told me they hated about home life is they can't shut their mind off. They're literally dying in insomnia, decision fatigue. And so the only way to move out of those horrific patterns that we would never see at work, or we'd have a terrible organization, is to move to a place where you can transfer over the ownership mindset to somebody else. And so hopefully we can have a part 2 where we can get together again, where we can deep dive into what that is. It requires customizing your defaults and having an ownership mindset.
I love that. We have about 1:30 left. So in like 30 seconds or less, any sort of parting word from each of you, just a few words of encouragement for moms as we move into 2021.
Yeah, well, I'd love to throw in self-care has started to carry so much baggage for people, just the term, but it's everything that we do for our mental, physical, and emotional well-being, right? It's not one thing, it's lots of things, but change your definition of it and add it into your system, right? To Eve's point, like make it part of your ritual, whether it's your morning routine or you set a 5-minute timer midday. I'm hearing from mothers who have all types of, concerns, challenges at home, challenges with kids. It's like, it could mean shutting your bathroom door for 2 minutes and splashing some water on your face. But, you have to give yourself some sort of break on a daily basis to survive this time.
Sarah, how about you?
I would layer on and say that sometimes we just need someone to tell us, like, that sucks. This sucks. This is hard. I'm so sorry this is happening. Thanks for telling me, right? Not everything needs a solution, and sometimes that doesn't help. We can get to solutions, but for everyone out there, this is really hard, and it's okay if you're not okay. And when we talk to each other, sometimes the first thing that's really kind to do is just be like, I see you. This really sucks.
I love that. So important, that validation. All right, Eve, any final words before we head out?
I'll just say that you all have a permission to be interested in your own life. You have a permission to be up on Leslie's, on the top of that pyramid. You have a permission to reclaim your identity besides your roles. And that unfortunately doesn't happen without us reclaiming our own time. So like Maxine Waters says, I'm here to reclaim my time and the time for all of you, and to say that you deserve to have that permission without any guilt and shame to live in your true power.
I love it. Thank you all so much. This was incredible. Really appreciate you being with us and sharing all of this wisdom.